Hi friends, hope you're doing well. This video is going to be, at least I'm going to title it anyway right now, is NATO alliance breaking. And maybe I'll tag in there. I was kind of working on maybe New World Order emerging, something like that, to that degree. So it's going on anyway, right? So, but definitely NATO alliance breaking. Okay, so this, if you're not familiar with my channel is primarily is biblical in nature. I mean, I stay to primarily has to deal with prophecy and also just theology in general, and then breaking news, things that events that happen as well. So that's primarily the focus. Well, in this case, no different. There was an intriguing thing came up today. So obviously you have the war with Iran, and where I think that's going. That's in another video, previous one. But this one I want to kind of delve into is where Trump is having a meeting in the White House with the Prime Minister of Ireland. I think his name is Taoiseach Michael Martin. So I think this is how he pronounces his name. So anyway, he in this interview, he's sitting in there, they're talking. They went through a number of topics and issues, but NATO came up during this conversation. And in it, Trump basically, was asked point blank about what he thought about NATO, and then them, because he has, really been given, the Europeans and UK and NATO some words about what he thinks. And some people are on two different sides of it. Hey, you should get involved. And there's differences of opinion for sure. And I definitely see where Trump's coming from on some of these things for sure. And that's neither here or there, but on at least when it comes to NATO, I can kind of understand the animosity there for. But I kind of think, who knows how this is going to play out. But in my mind, how if we're going to have this NATO alliance, kind of thinking back, and I got a video I'm going to kind of play where he's talking about this, so it's going to be short. It's only I want to say it's audio is going to be about 1 minute 30 seconds, and I'll post in there where the totality of it, but really short. I want you to hear that first so we can kind of set the stage, and then we'll delve into it. But it's going to be basically what I think we're headed in this. We're going to be jumping into book of Daniel. So we're going to jump in Daniel, probably, let's see, chapter 2, 7, and then Revelation 17. So we'll jump in those because of where I think how this could play out. But I want you to hear this first, and then we'll jump into it a little more in depth.
Mr. President, Iran, because the Iranian regime has told Sky News, if you put boots on the ground in Iran, it will be another Vietnam. Are you afraid of that?
No, I'm really not afraid of anything.
Mr. President, are you rethinking the United States' relationship with NATO, possibly getting out?
Well, I'm disappointed in NATO that we spend trillions of dollars on NATO. Think of it, trillions over the years, many trillions of dollars. It's one of the reasons we have deficits and we help other countries. And when they don't help us, I mean, it's certainly something that we should think about. I don't need Congress for that decision. As you probably know, I can make that decision myself. I work with some very smart people. And I'd always deal with Congress anyway, but I don't need Congress for that decision. But, when you say rethink, I have nothing currently in mind, but I will say that I'm not exactly thrilled when we help them with Ukraine. Look, Ukraine would have been over in one day if we didn't help. Frankly, Ukraine would have been over in the first day. They had the best equipment in the world. It was our equipment, given by Sleepy Joe Biden. No charge. Hundreds of billions of dollars of the best equipment in the world, no charge. I will say that I'm not happy about it.
All right, so kind of from a horse's mouth. So he's saying that he's not happy with NATO, and the question's point blank put to him. Do you think that you're rethinking and getting out? He said, well, I don't know about rethinking, but nothing on the plate at the moment, but it's something we got to look at. Okay, well, clearly, if you're saying that, you're contemplating potentially exiting NATO, well, how does that play out? And that's what I really wanted to kind of allude to. Where's this going? Where's it all at? And if we are truly in the end times, which I think we are, I definitely think we're rapidly moving to the end times, and we have to remember what Christ talked about, which is when the end comes, it'll come like a flood. It's going to come very quickly, very rapidly. Things will, it's like birth pangs. He talks about that. He alludes to that in Matthew 24. So the birth pangs, being that, once you start having labor pains, they come on very quickly, very rapidly, and they'll increase in intensity and shorten in duration. You have this, these contractions very quickly. And it's telling you as it speeds up, the process of speeding up, that, hey, the birth is coming. And the same way, he uses that as an analogy to his return. And in the same way, we're seeing a lot of events happening very quickly, very rapidly. And so as we're seeing these things, and it's the convergence of all these things really is what we're looking at. We're not looking at one thing. If you're looking at just one thing, clearly, that may look right, and you could try to build an entire theology on it and everything else, and then you're going to be disappointed. But when you look at the totality of things, and that's why we always want to look at all of Scripture and not just one. When God gave out his revelation, the revelation goes all the way from Genesis to Revelation. This isn't one book. You don't want to just focus on Revelation and then draw your entire conclusion on it, because there's other elements given that God has given to other prophecies and apostles and so forth, the prophets and apostles that would relay this information and on to the church. So it wasn't just entrusted to one guy. So everybody would go, well, this guy just made this stuff up, which is kind of like how Islam is. Islam it's all dependent on Muhammad, and you hope he got it right, maybe. If you're a Muslim, but there's no way of knowing. He's just his claim. He doesn't have any corroborating evidence. It's just a claim, right? And then when you actually look at it, it's false, obviously, from any, unbiased view of the Quran or reading it. You realize how many contradictions there are and everything else. They say it's a perfect book and clear and all this stuff, which is not, but neither here nor there. But the point being, unlike that in the Bible, God didn't do it like that. He gave prophecy to a number of people over a long duration, and it's all a consistent message from the same writer as you read it. You read through Genesis all the way to Revelation, and it just reads very fluidly, very beautifully, and it's just so well laid out that it couldn't have, there's no way you could have conspired to make it up, because there's so many writings from so many different people, but yet it's so cohesive in its writing, its understanding, and its message. And the same thing, part of that is prophecy, which is interwoven throughout this message given to us. So we got 66 books written over 1,600 years roughly by 40 plus authors plus, and each one of these, when you actually look at it, it's just so well written and so amazing in its message, and it's so cohesive in that it comes together like hand in glove. Quite beautiful, and that's why there's just, when you read it, there's no way you can sit there and go, wow, this is, we could sit down and conspire this to make this happen. There's just no way you could do it, because it's written over such a long period by so many different authors. And each of them, in the same way with prophecy, is giving the same kind of like message over a long period of time to different people. And when you have to take it all into totality together to really try to come to some really, I think, firm conclusions about what you think is going to happen. And then, even then, he doesn't give it all out in the, everything in minute detail. He gives us the big picture, the big scope of things that's going to happen, so that we can know. So when the events do happen, we can say, there it is, it's prophesied right there, and it's pretty amazing. Like, look at Micah 5, the birth of Christ and where he's going to be born, and that he'd be the Ancient of Days and so forth. Quite beautiful. You read it and it's like, wow, that's amazing. Isaiah, 9, so forth, where he talks about him, child's going to be born. He's going to be called Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. It happens. Amazing. He's going to die. He's going to come back to life. Isaiah 53. Amazing. He's going to be a light to the Gentiles. Isaiah 49. Amazing. Now you can look at this stuff and go, wow, it's pretty amazing. He's going to ride in on a donkey. Zechariah 12:12. It's like, wow, that's just amazing, right? So we look at those things and we go, same thing when you get into like this that we're going to talk about, which is, when we used to look at like the Soviet Union, for instance, we take that as an example. A lot of Christians for a long time, just like, when we look at like Ezekiel 38:39, Russia, it just doesn't seem to fit with the Soviet Union. It just wasn't there, and some people tried to make that work, and it just didn't seem to work the way the world was set up. And the alliances, Soviet Union wasn't in an alliance with Iran, and they weren't in an alliance with Turkey. Turkey was NATO, so it was their completely animosity. It just wasn't there for the alliance, just the way it was. But you had these people trying to squeeze this all together and make, it's like, no, definitely, that's why some come to the conclusion that it had to be after the tribulation, and it was like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense either. It doesn't really fit when you read Revelation. It just, the Gog-Magog war there doesn't fit the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38. Those two different ways the battles take place, two different ways they're destroyed. I mean, just not the same battle. You can look at it and see that. So how did you draw these together? Well, there was always this, conflict there, because the world as we saw it just didn't fit. And we're like, well, it didn't fit. And some smart Christians were just like, hey, we got to wait until events do fit. That's the smart way. You want to try to superimpose your worldview on existing things that are happening and then try to, force that into some kind of prophetic fulfillment. That's the worst thing you can do. So instead, you just want to see the events as we see it in the world and what's happening, look at scripture and what the things that are happening and see if they align. If they do, great. If they don't, great. Come to another conclusion. So anyway, so we saw the Soviet Union and it just didn't fit. And then suddenly, the Soviet Union gets into this, they're in this crazy, declining period, and very rapidly, it just started happening very quickly. And then amazingly, it just kind of like imploded, and it didn't blow up the world. They didn't kill everybody, which is a pretty nice thing. And that was definitely a God thing for sure, because it, by any stretch of imagination, with all the nuclear weapons they had, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons scattered throughout the Soviet Union, and all the, insanity that was happening at that moment, there was this period of stability and just, logic that took over, which I think was definitely a God thing for sure, that prevented the craziness of them killing each other and blowing up the planet and killing everybody else, or the weapons getting into the wrong hands and blowing up, other nations or long sought after enemies that they hated, I mean, it didn't happen. Instead, you had this kind of peaceful transition, as it were, to another form of government, and the nuclear weapons were, controlled, and you just didn't have a meltdown, chaotic war of, self-destruction and factions fighting and getting hold of nuclear weapons and wanting to kill each other. Now, civil war-ish type of event, which could have happened. A lot of people look at, the Soviet Union as just one cohesive, monolithic structure. It wasn't that case. It was like, yeah, you had a leadership that was controlled it all, but as that melted down and fell apart, I mean, the Soviet Union was made up of a lot of different ethnicities and groups and factions. And you could have had this, real crazy environment that could have just went completely, wonky for, bad for the world. But that didn't happen. And I think that was a God thing for sure. But once it declined and once it broke apart and then you had Russia, suddenly, we're like, wait a minute, this is really, a different story now. Now, you had the Soviet Union was antagonistic towards Turkey and didn't have alliance with Iran, but suddenly you have Russia, who's then slowly over a short period of time started to develop a relationship with Turkey and with Iran. And we're like, wait a minute. And then they start having a really close relationship with them. And then they started putting troops into Syria. And in that whole Syrian war that thing took place, and, the whole Arab Spring thing, is a whole other thing that took place and laid the foundation for what we see with incursion of Muslims into European Union, and, and them starting pushing Sharia law and Sharia courts. And then, and we know how that kind of plays out with beheadings and everything else talked about, like in Revelation, because we're like, they don't behead people in Europe anymore, so how could that fit? And suddenly now we're looking at it going, well, maybe it would fit, when Christians being beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast, not accept, starts to fit a little bit now, so you're starting to go, wait a minute, this could play out in this situation. So history and events can kind of change, and suddenly you see it in a more clear way. And what I usually find is that the Bible, when it's giving you prophecy, is to be taken literal. I mean, you take it as literal as you can, unless it's giving you symbolic language or figurative language. It looked like this, it appeared like that, it kind of, okay, well, that's a symbolic thing. It's giving you this kind of, overview of using picturesque type language to show you something of greater truth, kind of like an allegory or something like that. But in this case, it was telling you matter-of-factly that's what it was. So we need to take it that way. So in the same way as, the analogy with the Soviet Union, falling apart, and Russia, and how that, now it seems to fit in the Gog-Magog alliance, very much so. We're starting to see that, and it's probably not far off. I think, it's definitely the way things are going. I mean, God, we don't want people getting killed, but certainly God's word is going to come, and as Christians, we're looking at that. We're not looking for war and destruction. I think some people get that wrongly. We're simply looking at God's word and accepting His word and looking for the events and warning the people and telling people and so forth. That's what we're supposed to be doing as His ambassadors. So anyway, in the same way, NATO and the European Union just doesn't really seem to fit this beast empire. This final beast empire has got to emerge too, because you got to have this final beast empire if you're going to have the Antichrist, right? And then you got to have the temple and so forth, right? Well, part of is first you have the apostasy. We're going back to 2 Thessalonians. Well, I just did a video on that, so you can check that out if you would. And by the way, if you like my videos, please like, subscribe, share with other people if you can, but at least like and subscribe. I'd certainly appreciate it. So we have that, I think we have the apostasy that's been going on now, and it's really, accelerated over the last 50, 60, 70 years, since really 1950s for sure, since after World War II. We have this massive movement towards humanism and so forth, and atheistic, ideology, and then just, beliefs in all these different types of religions. Check out that video. I think you'll like it. At least it'll be informative. I hope you will anyway. So anyway, looking at this, it's like, okay, well, it's like 39 nations, I think it is, in your European Union. It doesn't fit, right? I mean, you had EU pulled out of the European Union, which, again, I think that may be a prophetic thing. I think the European Union or EU will wind up being part of the beast empire, personally. I think the United States will most likely be part of that beast empire, and I'll explain why. And so forth. I think other nations will too. I think most likely it's going to be a number of nations, Australia and others, Canada possibly, and others. I think they're all going to be part of that final beast empire. So when he's talking about this, and we kind of looked at it, we go, well, if the European Union just, there's 39 nations, it talks about a 10-nation alliance and made up of these 10 kings and then 3 overthrown and, 10 leaders. It's like, where all this coming from and where are we going with it? And it's like, and suddenly here we are, and, you got Trump on the scene, and he's talking about exiting NATO, and NATO just didn't fit either. We're looking at this NATO alliance, and it's like, well, how would NATO alliance fit into this 10-nation coalition, the beast empire? And it just doesn't seem to fit. And everybody's like, well, I don't know, NATO's been around for 70 plus years and it ain't going anywhere. It's the dominant alliance in the world and military alliance in the world. And you got European Union, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, it's one of those times where you just got to sit back and go, well, hey, it doesn't fit. So we have to wait and see what happens, right? You don't want to superimpose anything. And suddenly here we are. That birth pain is starting to pang. The contractions are happening, and here you are. You got him talking about, hey, I'm really disappointed. And, and his argument is, and I can understand some of it for sure. He's like, hey, it's like we've been helping to rebuild Europe. We helped establish this trade success. We, used money, blood, and treasure to, defend you and protect you and help, and here you are, when you're called upon, you're nowhere to be found. You make all the excuses in the world, but you don't come to the aid when we need you. It's like when somebody needs you, when your true alliance is tested, during war. It's not tested during peacetime. I mean, if you got a real alliance, that alliance is going to be tested not when you got no bombs falling. It's tested when you need them, right? That's when it's like any friendship. A real friendship isn't tested when you got tons of money in the bank, you got beautiful house, beautiful wife, everything's going great. Your true friendship is tested when, hey, your chips are down, you're feeling terrible, you need somebody to help you, right? That's the true friendship test. Well, that's kind of where Trump, I think, is at in his mind. And I think there's a lot of Americans would agree with that. Is like, hey, we've been supporting Europe for a long time and the UK for a long time. And, not asking for a lot, asking for very little, actually, not to actually get involved in the combat. I just ask to use your bases, just ask for some minesweepers. And the battle is pretty much over. I mean, they've pretty much destroyed their Navy, the Air Force, their air defenses. They occasionally got a few rockets or missiles they can shoot. They're shooting maybe a few a day. That's it. Really no major threat to any hostility. And that's the whole reason why you have the military. That's why you have military things, so that they can go in harm's way, and protect shipping lanes and all the stuff in international waters, right? So I understand his argument totally. And it does seem like a betrayal in many ways. Like, hey, we've defended you in so many ways, defending you in Ukraine. Actually, we're helping you there. And, and just so many other ways, right? throughout the decades. And I think there's a lot of Europeans and UK people that actually, British people that actually agree with that sentiment. You got some who don't. Obviously, they think, hey, they're going to get involved in another crazy Middle Eastern war. Which I understand that too. Nobody wants to do that. I don't. They're saying, hey, there's no exit strategy and all this. It's like, dude, the war's over, dude. I mean, it's like there's no land war coming. It's like they bombed them into oblivion. Their leadership's gone, decimated. Their military's decimated. I mean, they can shoot a few missiles or rockets here and there, but again, I think that's going to ultimately lead to, because it isn't a concrete overthrow of the leadership, it's going to lead to that new alliance that will be land oriented rather than nuclear oriented. It's going to be a land based war that will lead to the invasion of Israel. Just so you know, you can check that out in the other video again. But in this case, the war is basically won. They've been defeated. Nuclear facilities destroyed. I mean, there's overall, that's not on the table for them for a long time. But I think they do believe, because we're so reluctant to put ground forces, and Europe's just going, we're not putting ground forces down, and everybody's just so adamant about that. That tells me, if I was Iran, who's like, hey, these guys don't want to put ground forces on they don't want to use them for no reason whatsoever, and they're not getting involved in any ground. We need to be fighting a ground war. It's what we need to be fighting, not a building nuclear weapons. We need to put all of our focus on building up a conventional land force that can march down and invade their number one ally, who was the only one willing to fight for them, which was Israel. We can take them out. We'll have the entire Middle East and most of the Muslim world will be on our side, because as Muslims, they want Israel and the Jewish people destroyed. They believe that's some kind of end times fulfillment. And most of the Muslims around the world would be jumping up and ecstatic over that, unfortunately. And that's their crazy end times ideology, the belief system, the theology. So what do I see happening? Okay, well, suddenly here he is. He's now talking. We just listened to it on the news itself, and he's basically saying, hey, maybe it's something we need to be thinking about. I think he's doing more than just thinking about it. I think he's kind of thought this out for a long time, and he's let it stated a few times, that if there's a war, he doesn't believe NATO would come to our defense, America, that is, and he doesn't see us getting in, and he's stated other things where he doesn't see where America needs to get involved in some crazy European war that they drag us into, because some small little European country gets attacked, America's on the hook to go get into a land war. And he's like, why should we do that? It's not in our interest to do that. And he's got a point. Most Americans don't want to go fight in another European war where a bunch of people are getting killed simply because we're in some crazy alliance, that says you got to go do it, especially if they're not willing to come to your aid when you need them, right? It just makes sense. It's like, you're not going to come to us when we need you, but yet you want us to come to your aid when you need us. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. And I can kind of understand I definitely understand where Trump's going from 100%. And if you're looking at it from an American position, you're going to be like, hey, yeah, why should we come help you when you're not willing to come help us? And that's the nutshell of why we see, I think, NATO alliance is falling apart. And I think he's seriously going, and when he said that he doesn't need Congress to pull out of NATO, I think he was throwing something out there. I think he was firing across the bow, as it were, to Congress and letting them know, hey, guys, we're leaving NATO and there ain't nothing you can do about it. I think that's what he was doing. Very fascinating. So what does that mean prophetically? Okay, so if we're going to have this beast empire, which has to come on the scene soon, if you're going to have the revealing of the beast, you got to have the beast empire ultimately, and he's got to have it soon because they only reign for 1 hour. And we're going to read that. So we're going to jump into a few places. We're going to start off in, we're going to look at Daniel 4 real quick. So Daniel 4, you have Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to look at just 41 through 43. I may not read it all, but basically just three verses. But anyway, Daniel's he's taken off. They're going to captivity because the Jews at the time had been taken into captivity, defeated by Babylon because they haven't been sincerely serving the Lord. They've been worshiping idols. They've been doing a lot of stuff that they shouldn't be doing, not observing the Sabbath. So God says, hey, for all these years you haven't observed the Sabbath and so forth, not obeying me, worshiping false God, blah blah blah. You're going to, and this is all in the book of Jeremiah and others, but And he told him, you're going to be defeated. You're going to be taken off into captivity for 70 years. Lo and behold, Nebuchadnezzar comes, defeats them. They're all taken off. Well, when they were taken off, some of the most nobles and some of those who were, really the smartest, brightest, and best of Judea and so forth were taken off to Nebuchadnezzar to serve in his kingdom. He wasn't stupid. He's like, get the best, the brightest, the smartest, and, have them come and serve me because, who wouldn't? That's what you want. You want the best and brightest. If you go and conquer a place, if you just kill everybody, it's not going to make you any better. It just makes you have the spoils, but then you got to go attack somebody else and take their spoils and so forth. But if you can take their best and their brightest and have them come there and they can foment, beauty and culture and, and just financial wisdom and everything else, your kingdom's going to flourish, right? And that was, Nebuchadnezzar was smart in that regard. He's like, hey, I'm not going to just kill them. I'm going to bring them here and they're going to help that kingdom grow, And part of that was Daniel. Daniel and obviously his compatriots that were coming with him. Well-known people, right? So anyway, he goes in, he says, in this process, there's a prophecy that's given to Nebuchadnezzar. He's the king of Babylon. And in this king, in this vision that he gets, it's a statue. And the statue's got, the head of gold and so forth, breastplate of I'm trying to remember now. I think it's a breastplate of silver and belly of bronze. I kept getting those two mixed. And then he says the legs of iron, and then you got the feet, which is partly iron, partly clay. So this is the statue. So you can envision it's just a huge statue, and that's what he's envisioning. He's like, wow, this is really important. What does it mean? And he realized that this dream wasn't a normal dream. It was, a vision from God. So he's trying to ask his soothsayers, hey, tell me the dream, and then you can give me the definition of the dream. Don't just tell me, I'm not going to tell you the dream, and then you tell me the definition because you can make something up. Instead, he was pretty wise. He's a pretty smart guy. And he says, no, you're going to tell me my dream and then give me the interpretation of the dream. And they're all like, wait a minute, no, nobody can tell you your dream and then give you the interpretation of the dream. Nobody's ever asked this of us. Soothsayer. He says, well, you're going to tell me or you're all going to die. So, the ultimatum is put out there. They're all freaking out. And then ultimately Daniel hears about it. He goes there and he talks to the right party and he says, hey, bring me to the king. I can give him the interpretation of the dream. Well, I can't, but God will give it to me to give to him, and I'll give him the interpretation. Oh, behold, Daniel's brought in. He gives the king the dream, tells him what he dreamed. King's like, okay, you got it right. Tell me the definition, the interpretation, and now he's all listening. And he gives an interpretation. He says, what you saw is that the kings of the earth, of the world, that's going to reign. Now, he didn't tell him like all the kings that ever existed, from Genghis Khan and everybody else and, everybody in between, he gave him like the primary ones that God wanted to give him, just like he did with the churches, the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. There was more churches than that, but he picked out these 7 for a reason. They all had a meaning that had greater truth to it, dispensationally and so forth. In the same way, you have here the same thing. Some people disagree with that, dispensational stuff, but then you have to explain the kingdoms, because they're all dispensationally so, you stop and think about it. So he's telling him these kingdoms that's going to reign and different periods of time. And so anyway, he's talking about it. So you have the Babylonian kingdom, you had the Medo-Persian kingdom, before the Babylon, you had the Assyrian and the Egyptian, obviously, but you have the Medo-Persian one, then you have Greece who came along, then you had Rome that came along. Then at the end of that, he says, hey, there's one more, and that's the, this one that's going to come of the, it's going to be, and he doesn't really, give it such title. It just says it's unlike all of the other ones, and if anything else, this defeat of Iran really kind of reminds me of how that final beast empire will be so powerful. I mean, could anybody think that you would take a nation the size of Iran, the power of Iran, and 1 million man army, massive amount of missiles, everything else, and defeat them in 2 weeks? I mean, completely decimate them, wiped out their leadership, wiped out the Air Force, destroyed their Navy, sunk their Navy, destroyed their air defenses, have total air supremacy over their country, completely dominating the entire country within 2 weeks. It's unheard of. And most people, you still hear people online and stuff, posting stuff like, you're losing the war. And it's like, I don't know what war they're talking about. It's like, there's nobody in history by any matrix or standard that you can look at in history where a country goes in and completely decimates and destroys, the entire country the size of Iran in 2 weeks. I mean, that's unbelievable, and to go into Venezuela and just take its leader and just, dominate it that fast. Nobody's seen anything like this. And that's why I'm saying America will be part of that beast empire, not the preeminent nation in that beast empire. And we'll get to that. But, we'll see where we're at. We're running short on time. Dang. We're in that 30-minute cycle, and I try to condense everything down to that. So I do apologize. We're going to probably pick it up in the second video because attention spans. So everybody's got, nobody wants to go for 3 hours, so we're going to jump into the next video. And again, if you like this one, please like, subscribe, share it with other people if you can, or at least like and subscribe. I'd certainly appreciate it. Definitely helps. And I'll pick up in the second one, and then we'll just pick up where we left off, and we're going to be jumping right into Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 through 46, or 41 through 43. Sorry, 41 through 43. And anyway, we're going to pick it up there, and then we're going to jump forward, and we're going to go to Daniel 7, and we'll deal with that and a couple of those things there. I think it's verse 7 and 8, and maybe a couple other verses there. And then we'll jump into Revelation chapter 17, and that's where we really get into the finality of things and events, and where I think it's kind of like things are happening. So anyway, yeah, we'll see you in the next video. God bless. Be safe. Keep looking up, and keep your eyes focused on the prize. Stay in God's word. Trust in Him. Trust in Jesus Christ, and put your hope in Him. We'll see you.